when Kevin and Marnie approached me about giving this talk, I resisted for quite a while, actually. You don't really want it. I don't have anything particularly to say about this. What could I possibly add to something everybody already thinks about? But they persisted, so you get to be the victims of that. But I do think we need to be a bit humble about what we can say. Those who spend a lot of time and energy ruminating on the future, the professional futurologists, do tend to think that the most important things are the things that seem kind of out of box or ridiculous, as Jim Dater at the Hawaii Center for Future Study says. I think that even when they don't seem ridiculous, sometimes our forecasts in hindsight appear ridiculous, as perhaps this example from Napoleon kind of belittling Robert Fulton's plan for a steam engine might indicate. What, sir? You would make a ship sail against the wind currents by lighting a bonfire under her decks? I pray you excuse me. I have no time to listen to such nonsense. And of course, whenever a future forecast in any way proposes alternatives to the way that we do things, we tend to be a bit blind to those, as perhaps was the case with Napoleon. We also tend to be a bit blind to the possibility, or at least minimize the possibility, of doing things differently from the way that we do them. Sir William Pierce in the British Post Office in 1878. The Americans have need of the telephone, but we do not. We have plenty of messenger boys. And then, of course, we're often blinded by our own incumbency, or perhaps we have a tendency to believe our own PR departments about our very strong, impregnable market position, as might be evidenced here by Ken Olson from Digital Equipment Corporation, maker of VAXes and other now defunct computers, said when he opined that there's no reason anyone would want a computer in their home. So all of this suggests to me that we need to be very modest and humble whenever we try to look into a future ball, gaze into a crystal ball and predict the future. I went back to not only a talk that I gave about 7-8 years ago about the future of media audience research to kind of check and see how good of a job I did in imagining the future there. And I got some of it right, at least the notion of integrating various kinds of data sets, which wasn't happening as much then, and which is very much a part of the practice with fusion studies in audience research. But I thought it'd be interesting also to go back and look at a lot of the forecasts of the future that were evident around 1999, 1998, where people were thinking about the turn of the century. And there were a lot of serious scholars, a lot of serious thinkers writing about that. And I'm afraid most of them missed a lot of very important things. They certainly didn't see the rise of religious-based conflict on a global scale, and the security challenges brought by sort of a rise of fundamentalism in various places, particularly in Islam. They didn't anticipate the tech bubble bursting. In fact, most of the forecasts that you would see written in 98, 99 tended to kind of extrapolate an ongoing economic future, and I'll leave it to you to decide at the end of the talk whether I may be guilty of some of the same error here. They certainly didn't see the gyrations in the market that we saw later in the first decade of the 21st century. Since we didn't really even have derivatives in the late 90s, they certainly couldn't have imagined the impact that they would have on our financial system. Nobody, of course, saw social media. It hadn't really been enabled to any degree at all at that point. As of 2000, Google didn't even have a business plan. It was a company at that point. And of course, we didn't have anything close to the important technology of mobile communication that has been transforming so many aspects of our business. So it's very, very difficult to look even a year or two into the future, given the pace of change, and then also some subterranean kinds of influences on the future that we may not be tuned into in our everyday life. I like to use the example of the iPhone, okay, because this cool little device launched in June of 2007, and everyone knew it was a very cool device when it came out, but no one anticipated all of the knock-on effects that it would have across so many spheres of activity. It's fundamentally, a key part of Web 2.0 and the whole growth of user-generated content, photos being posted and uploaded, people communicating directly, self-publishing, all of those kinds of things. It wasn't really what people were thinking immediately when Steve Jobs did his unveil. YouTube and the whole phenomenon of the gigantic growth of video. Certainly no one said, oh, there goes brick and mortar retail, right? Nobody imagined showrooming. No one imagined that we'd be in a world where users would go into the store and scan the code and then figure out how to buy it on Amazon cheaper, or find the cheaper store within a mile radius of where they are right now. It wouldn't have occurred to us because people invented these uses after the fact. The political impact, the kinds of things that we saw in the Arab Spring, the things that we see with opposition groups everywhere, from Iran to Ukraine to Occupy Wall Street. We didn't see any of those things coming when Steve Jobs introduced us. No one would have said, you're not going to be able to get to a dinner party anymore without someone whipping out the phone and checking a fact by Googling some question that comes up in a dispute. No one would have imagined that every decorous plate of food presented somewhere is have to be photographed on the spot and uploaded. And in my business, none of us said, oh, there goes the newsstand. Now newsstand had been challenged for quite a while, owing to concentration of distributors, to shifts in shopping patterns, the growth of big warehouse stores, less frequent visits to the market, self-checkout, all of those kinds of things were eating away at the time that people would spend queuing to pay for their groceries, and in the meantime kind of browsing a magazine rack that was conveniently placed there and stimulating an impulse purchase. But I got to tell you, in the couple of years since this device was introduced, go look and see what people are doing when they're standing in line, if they're standing in line at all, and they're looking at a screen. And that's not, excuse me, that's not unique to the magazine business. I would submit that most of the people in this room who have anything to do with stimulating impulse purchases have a very similar problem of how you get in front of a consumer who's spending a lot of time looking at this screen. But my point just simply is that you have, sometimes a very fundamental change in technology, and you don't know where it's going to take you in terms of the impact on business. Nor would anyone have expected that it would have had such a big effect on the practice of market research surveys. How many people have tried to run a survey using any kind of sort of rating scale on a phone? You know that you can't use a grid. You have to simplify. You have to shorten the questions, and you know that you've got to format it entirely differently. And if, as is the case with our customer base, you've got anywhere from 25 to 50% of the prospective respondents to an online survey accessing it through a mobile device, then you better optimize for that, have that actually be the default for the way that you construct the survey, or else you have to steer them intentionally to a PC. So humility is in order. Caveat emptor. Well, let's take a leap and see what McDonald has to say about where we may be going in market research. There are, in general, I'd say, three kinds of or categories of scenarios that most observers of the future tend to point to, and I'm going to not be an exception in that regard. This slide actually comes from a fellow named Robert Moran, who gave a talk at the ARF Leaders Forum last fall, trying to anticipate future market research. I said, oh, I gotta get that slide. I'm not going to reprise all of his forecasts. They're his, they're not mine, but his were built around three different dimensions, as mine would be, that those things that draw really from social changes, from changes in attitudes and values, behaviors, feelings about privacy, it can be demography, other dimensions of that sort. Changes that are driven by technology, such as the ones that I was just talking about regarding the iPhone, and then those that are driven by economics, either the economics that affect the consumer market or that affect the industry players, either client side or agency, media, market research companies, any of those. So here are the economic forces that I see, and you could have an extended conversation about any of these, but there are a few that I think are worth calling out here. The first, of course, is globalization, the ability of capital and jobs to move to the places of greatest economic advantage. Popularized, I guess, by Tom Friedman with his Earth is Flat book a few years back. Now this has already, of course, taken place to a large degree in many sectors of market research, with outsourcing to Bangalore, call centers, trying to reduce labor costs by moving to the lowest priced locations for that, wherever that can be transferred. And I would be inclined to think that this is something that's going to continue to be a force over the next 10 years, which is kind of the time horizon I was trying to think about when considering where we were likely to be going. So I think our industry will be affected by globalization, as it has been. Caveat here would be that if I'd been giving this talk 100 years ago today, on, what is this, April the 10th, 1914, at that point the world was quite economically integrated. You know, a lot of investments, a lot of trade, particularly in Europe, and it was thought that that was a great protection against the kind of conflict that used to engulf Europe quite regularly. And Europe at that point had gone 99 years since the end of the Napoleonic Wars without any big fights breaking out. And we all know what happened later in 1914 and in the balance of that century, and it completely blew up globalization as it played out then. So, you know, yeah, I think globalization is likely to continue, but I don't know, we could be right on the precipice of some other kind of unseen conflagration that completely changes everything. You just don't know. There are a lot of worrisome signs out there, and the markets have actually been trying to factor some of that in of late, so we'll see. Second broad economic force that I would call your attention to, I kind of put under the general heading of Schumpeter's gale. Okay, so the image here is of a gale, of a wind. Joseph Schumpeter, of course, a sort of very important and influential economist from the mid-20th century, who adapted some of the ideas actually of Karl Marx in noting that firms that have some competitive advantage tend to lose this over time. Tends to be a declining rate of profit, and that leads to a lot of dynamism in capitalism. It leads to constant struggle to find a better way of doing things, a lower cost process, a more boosting productivity, and pursuing a rather relentless pursuit of growth. Now, we are all still in that, and as long as you live within a capitalist system, I think that's a fact of life. It's a fact of life for all of our companies. It's a fact of life for market research players as well. And to some extent, it's, I think, when we talk about the technology stuff, it's being accelerated a bit by other developments and embedded by that. And it certainly plays into the same thing I was talking about with globalization, looking for more cost-effective labor supply and labor market substitution as well. So that whole family of effects, I think, is quite important. And then the third sort of economic force is the one that's come to our attention a lot more, having to do with the growing importance of networks and of networked enterprises and networked economies. It was captured to some extent by Metcalfe's law, which I think is more an observation than a law, but it's the notion that the value of networks is proportional to the square of number of connected users. So, we've all heard about network effects, and the fact that the value, the reason that people find value in coming into Facebook is because of the size of the network. The sort of most outrageous example of late was this thing called WhatsApp, which almost no one in the United States knew even what it was until it was announced that Facebook was spending $19 billion to acquire. Now, it's a function of the number of connected users globally, even if it doesn't really have a business model of any consequence for, at present, converting those people into money. Facebook believes that the value of the network is such that they would pay $19 billion for it. Let's talk about technological forces for a moment. So, using another one of these great laws that we have, another one that's not really a law but an observation, Moore's law. It's probably the most familiar of this to everyone in the room. The notion that every 18 months or so, the computing power on a transistor doubles. And it applies to most things digital that are scaled under the rules of digital economics. People have been looking for this to top out for quite a long time, and it still really hasn't. And so it's driven a whole sort of cascading effects, law of accelerating returns, accelerating price performance ratios, falling cost of transmission, cloud computing, cheap storage. So that's how we have free Gmail. Which then builds bigger networks, a la Metcalfe's law. So all of these things push very, very quickly the kind of technological, breathtaking technological progress that we continue to see. 2 years ago, we would have been making fun of self-driving cars. But it's not so funny anymore. It's actually a reality. We kind of made fun of Siri and how she didn't really perform very well, voice recognition. But it's actually gotten significantly better and will get significantly better. These are all, aspects of this very, quickly accelerating progress that takes place when Moore's law is in effect. And that, I think, affects the market research industry and every other part of us as well. And this is maybe a manifestation of it as well, this progress in speech recognition and artificial intelligence, and then also progress in biotech and nanotech. We're at a point now where most of the data in the world are, in fact, digital. They're stored as zeros and ones. Even the old analog stuff that was in the libraries has been digitized. And most of the new data, the financial data, the market data, the consumer behavior data. How many people in the room have a Fitbit or a Jawbone or one of those sort of wearable things? Okay. Well, those are getting more and more. All of those are new digital data on how your body's doing, how many steps you're taking, how you're sleeping. Medical data will increasingly be digital. All of these data are digital, and all of these data are available for analysis if we know how to marshal that. So that does it for technological forces. Social forces, I think, actually sort of follow from this to some extent. Tyler Cohen, an economist at George Mason University, wrote a terrific book, which I would recommend to anybody interested in the subject, called Average is Over. And it's been picked up by The Economist and a few other publications as well, The Atlantic, which is kind of just trying to think through the implications of all of the above that we've been talking about for jobs in the future. And paying a lot of attention to what he describes as a shifting border between man and machine in the workplace. This is, again, going back to nanotechnology and robotics. But this labor substitution from machines is, in my view, likely to be even more important than globalization in the impact that it has on how we accomplish certain kinds of jobs in the next 10 years. It fuels very advanced specialization in some areas, and also leaves a lot of room for certain kinds of jobs, we'll talk about a little bit more in a moment. But it puts a squeeze on everything in the middle. Anything that's kind of an average or routine or repetitive kind of function across all kinds of spaces in the labor market. And so one implication of that, which some of you may have experienced as well, is this feeling that somehow this good education that you had maybe isn't as up to date as it was 5 years ago. The shelf life of a college education may actually be shrinking a bit here as very different kinds of skills start to be needed more in the marketplace. So this, I think, suggests to folks who've gotten far enough along in their careers, at least to the level that we all have, a need for a lot of adaptive intelligence, or as Shelley Palmer, a blogger who I follow, put it, you don't have the luxury, you don't get to live in a world without constant learning. I guess Bob Dylan put in the song, said, "He not busy being born is busy dying," sort of the same idea. So in addition to the standard things that you would talk about in terms of social forces, the demographics and the values and culture and tribal affiliations, I think these newer forces are going to affect us. And this, again, could be rather volatile. This could lead to social conflict, to a lot of dislocations. I think the kind of thing that we saw with Occupy Wall Street is indicative of some of those, but I think it ramifies into the political area as well. So these are macro forces that affect everything, including what happens within market research, in my view. So some of the things have already happened as a result of this. They're already sort of present if you stop to think about them. I don't know about your firms, but the more that we are able to read behavior directly, the less need we have to go out and commission surveys to try and study it the old-fashioned way. Okay, so when we are able to take a lot of information directly, say, from digital editions of readers and see which features people are spending time on, which things they're interested in, I don't have quite the same need that I did once upon a time to go out and try and survey people and ask them about that. I've got direct market feedback. I can build systems to deliver that to dashboards. So I don't need people to write reports. It comes directly out of the data to the manager's desk. And a whole process is kind of made redundant. We've already had, I think, a fundamental shift in our business from relying exclusively upon asking questions about what people are doing to capturing their behaviors. This has had an effect already in a diminished demand for not only surveys, but qualitative research. I would wager that almost everyone in the room probably does less qualitative research than they did at some point 5-10 years ago in their business. It's still needed. You still fill it in because it adds some texture. It adds some ways of trying to understand the phenomena that we're understanding or trying to understand. But we don't rely on it in nearly the same way that we did before. And then we're beginning to see a shift really from even processes like content analysis to more machine-based, or in sort of that halfway house of it, where it's crowdsourced rather than sort of run in the old-fashioned way of doing some content analysis and data reduction process. Again, machines have gotten much better at scanning, at translating, at classifying content and understanding it. That is something that will get better still. I've seen some very interesting work, some of it here at MSI, where people run, in effect, experiments using Amazon Turk, okay, crowdsourcing choices and choice models. So all these things are available to us to actually help run our information requirements and conduct our work in a much less, in a faster and less expensive way than we did in the past. But again, with the net effect that we don't need some of the same functions within our departments that we did in the past. And then we, of course, have, as we will no doubt hear in the workshops, the breakout sessions this afternoon, new ideas coming up constantly, new technologies. I was just at ICOM in Seville. There's an extraordinary wealth of new technologies coming online that were being introduced there for market research purposes. It can be used for that, or for direct, for marketing practices. And these very frequently, as they have been in the past, are productized and kind of codified into something that is an off-the-shelf offering. Examples that you might be familiar with might be things like, I consider actually online communities as a form of productizing a capability here where you sort of create something, you go to it over and over again. It's less expensive than the old-fashioned way, but you can actually turn it in and out. Things like Insight Express and Dynamic Logic are taking, a basic, quasi-experimental design and making it a turnkey operation so it basically can be repeated over and over again to do advertising effectiveness measurement. These kinds of things are already very much with us. So going forward, I would expect that these things will continue. There'll be more focus on behavior and less on motivation. More passive observations of the digital footprints that we all leave when we go shopping, when we transact online, when we move around in space and give signals to the satellites through our GPS of health data and wearable tech. And as I said before, digital editions in my particular space. And more of these market indicators as opposed to old-fashioned market research things. Now, so the question is, what does this mean if you're Millward Brown and you make a lot of money doing brand tracking studies, to use one example? I wouldn't bet on that. If I'm Millward Brown, I'd be thinking about what I'm going to do after that. If I'm Ipsos, I'd worry about what am I going to do after that. All of these things seem to me to be very vulnerable in the current environment because we'll be doing less of the conventional market research, fewer surveys, less qualitative, less face-to-face. I think within research departments like the one that I run, we'll be doing less reporting. I think you engineer that out of your practice a lot, which actually is a good thing. That's a very deadening, repetitive, dull thing. We have already on voice recognition progress that's gone to the point where, at Forbes.com, for example, a lot of the sort of basic writing, the stock market, these are the 5 leading stocks, leaders, laggards, the index went up and down by X amount. These are fairly routine technical writing tasks. You don't need people to do them. It can be done perfectly well by a machine at this point because it follows pretty predictable rules. Now, 5 years from now, is a machine actually going to be able to search all of that for some deeper insights and for some, broader pattern and be able to say something intelligent about that? Right now, that seems far-fetched. But as I said, a lot of other things seemed far-fetched 5 years ago. And the progress here is so astonishing and so fast that I wouldn't rule it out at all. Over on the database side, I think this means, less reliance on sort of 1980s style databases with columns and rows. Nice orderly SQL databases, because you're going to have more unstructured data to deal with all the time. So you're going to need strategies like Hadoop for trying to connect those and have them at least talk to each other. The idea of putting them all into one integrated database is, again, a very nice 1980s idea, but by the time you got it all into one database, it would already be obsolete. So the sort of lighter approaches right now that try to get databases to dynamically talk to each other to be able to address questions are more the direction that we're going, I think. And so, organizationally, for most of our firms, I think this means a closer relationship, hopefully a closer relationship, although depending upon how siloed and turf-oriented your organizations are, it could be a very competitive relationship between the function that used to be called market research and the function that used to be called IT, which is now meeting around something called analytics. We've already seen a significant rise in the demand for certain kinds of expertise, and that's around data scientists, statisticians, engineers, experts in machine learning, things of that sort. I still think you need integrators and you need interpreters, but there are more of those, because those are probably more, that better describes most of the people in the room, I suspect, right now than there are the people who have these kinds of specialized skills that are extremely scarce. You think about some of the intellectual underpinnings, the way that we were brought up when we studied research methodology and statistics. Bayesian statistics and sort of Tukey's exploratory data analysis techniques were really kind of off in the margin. They were an exotic specialty for people who were really interested in far afield branches of statistics. Most of us studied, what I call Gaussian statistics. That sort of, that assumed a normal distribution. We studied, the measures of central tendency and maybe Monte Carlo simulations or general extensions of the linear model. We studied regression analysis. All of this with good workhorse methods that assumed a normal distribution. But with these kinds of data sets that I'm talking about, they're not normal. We start really not with assuming normal distributions. We start by asking, what kind of distribution is this? Is it a Pareto distribution? Is it a geometric distribution? Is it a Poisson distribution? What have I got? What am I working with here? And what kind of tool would I be applying to that? Now, that's not what we learned in school way back when. Some people did, but not to me. Never mind the network stuff, or the sort of neural networks and all of that, the very, very exotic stuff that newer graduates of our educational system have been exposed to, but I'd say many of the people running research departments and functions are less familiar with. I think the underlying sort of intellectual infrastructure for a lot of what we're doing is changing in response to these different kinds of data that we have. I think it means that in some ways we probably, and this I don't think is necessarily a good thing, but I think that a lot of what we do when we try to implement big data solutions and look for any kind of correlation at all, or predictive analytics, which is sort of a very souped up form of correlational analysis, is we're in effect moving more toward a direct response model and away from a marketing model. That happens a lot in media right now with the move toward programmatic buying. Okay, where as of a couple of months ago in the United States, we tipped over the line for the display advertising on the web, where 52%, for the first time, it was over 50% of the display ads were placed through programmatic buying. That means machine to machine. Now, part of that's real-time bidding, but it's not all that. Like you can do programmatic buys on Condé Nast sites, but it's not real-time bidding. It's for a fixed rate, but it's all still cleared machine to machine. Again, it's squeezed out the middle. There's no salesman. So, we pass on that savings to the buyer. There's no commission. They're trying to move more TV buying to that. That's like some deep cultural, change would be required for that to actually happen. I mean, I don't know how you fathom the upfront market, how you reconcile that with the view of programmatic buying, but that's part of the pressure that's taking place. But if you think about that, a lot of this is really within a model that is more like direct response. At Condé Nast, we have another example of this on our websites that just went live this week, was just announced. It's an algorithm that was developed at one of our sites at Ars Technica that is basically a virality detector. Okay, and we're observing, trying to figure out when do things go viral. So editors post stories, and some of them really take off on social media, and some of them don't. So, and the old-fashioned way, the research way of thinking about that would be, let's look at the ones that went viral and study them and try and figure out what they have in common, and then come up with like a checklist of things that editors should think about that might go viral. And of course, it wouldn't work because it's so situational. It would be quite imperfect. So this is the atheoretical approach that says you don't care, just have an algorithm, and you can check and watch the first 15 minutes after the story is posted, and if the velocity exceeds a particular level, likely it's going to go viral. So now we have a whole advertising offering that's been very, very popular in its testing for advertisers who want to be part of something that's going viral. They're in queue for the next one that comes up, and it's like a distinct thing, but very atheoretical. There's no one asking the question, what makes it go viral? It's atheoretical. It's more like just direct response. One thing does better than the other. That's all you need to know. And in fact, when I've had conversations about these kinds of things with some of the leading players in this, particularly at Google, I sort of refer to them as the Jacobins, if you will. They're a bit dismissive of the idea that you actually need a theory of action, that you need to have an argument about human motivation for why certain things happen. Say, if the algorithm can figure it out, why do you need all that? And it's a fair question. I think it would be a very interesting debate. I think also that given the structure of what we have with us now, we can see more field experiments just because they're easier to execute. And then, as I said, less concern with theory and motivations. Maybe in the future, all we'll be saying is my algorithm is better than your algorithm, and leave it at that. So all of this, I think, has profound implications for the labor market in general, and also for the labor market in market research. Over time, technological improvements have generally brought us greater wealth, higher productivity, higher employment, and that's been broadly distributed. It's been something that has helped to support a broad middle class and a fairly, broad distribution of income, and has thus led to kind of a calm and sort of all, rising tide lifts all boats kind of a view within the polity. And I think the key question is whether, with the present trends, this is still true. There are plenty of indications that maybe it's not. And a couple of them I would point to, that sort of came to my attention as I was thinking about this subject for this talk. Some economists at Oxford, Carl Benedict Frey and Michael Osborne, who have really tried to analyze which job categories are most likely to be displaced by automated processes, smart machines, robots, and things like that might seem fanciful, but may not be at all. And I'll share with you in a moment a couple of their conclusions. Another, I already recommended Tyler Cowen's book, Average is Over, but any who want to really get spooked and read further on some of these ideas might well pick up a very new book that's just come out by two economists at MIT, Eric Brynjolfsson and Andrew McAfee, who argue in the second machine age that we're entering a very disruptive period of economic growth with great benefits, but also with very, very wrenching changes. And there are schools of economists elsewhere. There's a group at Princeton that have also been making very similar arguments. So, the idea here is that when smart machines have access to big data, we will indeed have big jumps in productivity, but with fewer workers. So this is text mining programs that displace legal assistants and biopsies being performed by image processing software, accountants being replaced by tax software. Machines have gotten pretty good at translations. And as I said, they're also at the point of being able to write serviceable prose. So fewer technical writers needed. So this implies a very strong bias toward engineering talent. And then also towards some superstars. And maybe an interesting example that you would be familiar with of this process that might have already or that has already happened really comes in the area of photography. So photography was associated for many years with Eastman Kodak, which was founded in 1880. And at its peak, employed about 150,000 people in Rochester, New York, but then also had all sorts of other support suppliers in chemicals and paper that were produced that represent a lot of jobs elsewhere. They made a lot of film, they made a lot of cameras, sold globally, were a very important company in the Dow Jones. The same year that they went out of business, Instagram, which was in 2012, which when Kodak went out and Instagram was bought for $1 billion by Facebook. Instagram was built with 15 engineers, sold for $1 billion. Now, they wrote a press where photography has never been more popular from a consumer standpoint. 70 billion photos were uploaded to Facebook last year. They have 130 million customers, sharing 16 billion photographs annually, just within Instagram. So, but far fewer people employed. Those who are the winners in that sort of winner-take-all scenario do very well. Productivity is enhanced, but what happens to all those other people? Told you this was going to be fun. So let's look at these guys from Oxford and see what they are predicting here. So this is the probability of displacement by computers over the next 10 years, according to Frey and Osborne at Oxford. So telemarketers are toast, in this field. But what's interesting about their forecast is that there's not really a clear blue-collar, white-collar difference here. White-collar jobs are as likely to be displaced as blue-collar jobs. You notice economists are 0.43 in this estimate, which I think is very brave of them. At the low end, these sort of jobs like that involve kind of complex pattern recognition, integration of information, or that just don't scale, that don't scale digitally, are not likely to be, roboticized. So these are like your athletic trainer, your priest, your editor. How about that? I left market researchers blank. So who wants to guess? Any probability guess in the room here? Of course, it depends on what we mean by market researcher, right? Yeah. Okay, so they had a couple of categories. Computer and information research scientists, so these are the guys that we've been talking about as very much in demand. They have low probability. Operations research, 0.35, so it's a little higher. Survey research, 0.23, better than I would have guessed. But a research assistant, just crunching the data, summarizing. Same thing with market research analysts. Those are much higher probabilities. So it's that kind of middle, that kind of reporting thing which I was talking about, which I think in many respects is already going away. So what I think still is needed then in this, and is maybe a bit of comfort for those of us who want to stay in the workforce for a while, is that wherever you still have the need for ideation, for integration of information, or for communication between the business units and the geeks, there's a very important kind of space there that remains needed. And actually, in their view, marketers themselves are still very much needed. So here, I did this on the flight from London yesterday with some new software, so it's very lame. But what I was trying to do here with this Venn diagram was to lay out kind of the three broad skill areas that I see as being kind of at the core of market research going forward. So you've got the hacker types. Okay, here's your engineers, your IT guy or girl. Okay, which we didn't used to really need. They kind of served us, at a distance, but they weren't really part of our research operations. And you had the math stat people, which some of us needed some of, although a lot of that you could really outsource or rely on software to provide for you. And then the domain expertise, which would be where we know something about the field that we're studying and become very expert at that. And I would say that traditional market research departments were at the border between the green and the blue bubbles. Okay, I don't think there was a border between the orange and the blue bubbles before, and that's probably like a very dangerous space. Hackers with domain expertise, and I don't know what those jobs would be. If I were to try and guess what a market research function, think about how we organize it now. You tend to either have your departments organized by brand. Okay, so you've got people that are kind of generalists, but they specialize, if you've got multiple brands within your company, you might be organized that way. You might be organized functionally, so people that are doing certain kind of special, maybe your modeling people compared to your custom research people, syndicated research people, however you've set it up. So my thinking is that maybe what we have going forward is kind of an insights layer. And these are the people with some domain expertise, client-facing, but these are cross-disciplinary folks. These are people who are good at business problem assessment, kind of your internal consulting. They help to formulate an analytic strategy to guide what the analysis team will do. They're good at research design, but they're also good at kind of creating the narrative from all of that and making it understandable to the internal clients. And then an analytics layer, which I think is much tougher group, much more deeply expert group, which would include some of these math stat people and the hackers with deep functional expertise in areas like artificial intelligence, engineering, machine learning, working with these dynamic databases. I suspect that in many cases they will not be owned by market research because they will be supporting multiple functions within the enterprise. They will be as important to the finance department as to the research or marketing function. They will be part of ad ops. At least in the media world, ad ops are the folks that traffic the ads on the websites. But these people will be in a kind of a different cultural part. This very geeky layer. And then I suspect that, and not everyone may find that this is part of the research function, but I think you actually need an activation group as well. The group that works on the back end after you've actually completed an analysis, or designed a process that works on, it's another bridge function, the bridge between the insights that were developed and then actually implementing it and putting it into operation. So I don't know what the proportions in a given department of what the proportions would be across this. My guess is that it might be something like 15 to 20% in the insights group, 70 to 75% in the analytics, and 10 to 15% in the activation group. So not a particularly profound, but I think, at least worth considering as a way that we may be organizing ourselves in this future. So I leave really with the question from Isaiah Berlin's fable about whether you really want to be a fox or a hedgehog, and when coming up in graduate school, the thinking very much is you want to be a hedgehog. You want to have deep knowledge. You don't know many things, but you really know some things extremely well. And that may be true for that middle layer. But I think for most of us, actually, the evidence is suggesting a lot more. I might be betting more money on the fox and the one who's able to do a fair amount of integration of information across those layers, because I suspect we will never quite turn ourselves into the data scientists that are needed in that middle layer. So those are my thoughts. I hope it provided a bit of grist for thinking, and I think that's good. That's good. Do we have time for questions? What do you want? That clicker? Okay. There you go. Oh, okay.
So we actually have time for some questions. We're actually in terrific talk. I think lots of themes we'll pick up on, and I know already this morning a couple of those. But we have time for questions. A couple quick questions. Anybody? Mike.
Scott, good talk.
Thank you.
I'm not convinced that the jobs that involve supplying interpretive information, this may be what you also said, I'm not convinced that the managers who have access to the dashboards actually have that much time when they're reading 100 or 200 emails a day to really get into those dashboards and say, oh, I can skip my research analyst, I'll figure out what this means. So do you want to comment on that? I just feel like you're taking a position out of the space and saying it's going to go away because it'll be substituted by a dashboard, but that implies that the user of the dashboard actually wants to do that or even has the skill to interpret.
It's a fair point. And in my sort of final slide with a possible view of how you might be structured in the future, that may be part of that activation job description is to constantly be working with that. What we find right now with having amped up the amount of information we give about what's going on the websites to the web editors and working with them, that it's a huge amount of sort of back and forth. They get a lot more data to respond to, but it's not always self-explanatory, or they may, you need engagement around that. I think it's a fair point. But my other point, though, was the process of taking the numbers and dropping them into something else and shoving them out, which occupies a considerable amount of time. And it's not just in research departments. I mean, think of, how much checking of expense reports goes on within companies, and how many people, there's, just, an enormous amount of repetitive stuff. Very routine. And all those seem to me to be up for grabs.
Okay, Pam.
Just an observation, a thought. What if the activating is the brand marketers, and instead of insights or research becoming decision support, we are decision makers, and the rest are activators? And I think if you can harness the knowledge and the power of what we do, and you get credibility for it, I see it happening, that power shifting a little bit every year. Anyway, just a thought.
That could be as well. Again, it depends upon the situation in each firm. Yeah.
Time for one more question. Anybody? Yeah.
So thank you very much. I agree with virtually everything you've said. And one of the issues that we faced is how you wean an organization away from its traditional ways of doing things. And I just wonder if you have any thoughts about how you actually got Condé Nast to probably move from some old ways of doing things to some new ways.
Well, it's a slow process. I'd say in our case, what's the old saying about, the mind focuses when you're in a firing squad, there's a certain amount of crisis that, came to bear in the big financial crisis in 2007. Condé Nast had actually being, oriented so much toward the luxury end of the marketplace. In the preceding few recessions, it sort of coasted through unscathed. But it was the high end of the marketplace that led the downturn in 2007, and we got hammered more than anyone else. So it concentrated the attention of everyone, and not just the management. It included all of the editors. So suddenly, Anna Wintour and Greg Carter and David Remnick and all these celebrity editors realized that you can't keep having this fun if you're not running a profitable business. So everyone got very, very focused on how to run the business smarter. And it was a pretty smart company before, but it got much, much smarter. And that sort of dynamic drive to be more productive and be more effective didn't end once the pressure went off. I'd say it helped to kind of galvanize some culture change within the company.
Thanks so much, Scott. Thanks. Great job.